Video, you're watching my lesson on the respiratory system as well as the circulatory system. So in this lesson, I'm going to talk about the respiratory system, and I'm going to start off with what is its job, right? Why do we have a respiratory system, or a respiratory system, as some would say? The reason why we have a respiratory system or a respiratory system is that its job is to provide oxygen for the body. Its job is to provide oxygen for the body. So basically, you've already come to the conclusion that the lungs are a big part of the respiratory system, and breathing is a big function of the respiratory system, right? It's a big part of it. Well, the reason why we breathe is to get that oxygen in our body, right? To get that oxygen in our body. So the respiratory system's job is to get oxygen for the body. So why the heck do we need oxygen, right? What's the point? What's so special about this gas that we take in from the air? Well, oxygen is super important, is very important for a very special chemical reaction that happens in our body. Now, I'm not going to tell you what, well, it's right here, but you don't necessarily need to know what it is yet. But what you should know is that oxygen is important for a certain reaction in our body. This chemical reaction is happening every second of every day from the day you're born to the day you die. This reaction is constantly happening. And if you're just curious, it's sugar. This guy's sugar right here. And you have oxygen. And they basically combine together, and a reaction happens. And this reaction is called cellular respiration. You don't need to know that. To make carbon dioxide, CO2, water, and something called ATP. Now, I'm not going to go into so much detail because, again, you don't need to know this yet. If you go into high school, well, when you go into high school, and if you take biology, you will learn this and you will have to know it. All you need to know now is that the reason why we need oxygen is because it's important for a chemical reaction that happens in our body. That's it. So oxygen is needed for a chemical reaction in our body. And this chemical reaction makes energy, right? We need energy to move. We talked about this in our muscles, in our muscle talk, in our muscle lessons, sorry. Our muscles move our bodies, but in order to move, they need energy. In order for our heart to beat, it needs energy. In order for us to do anything, it needs energy. So we get our energy, well, at least our nutrients, from the digestive system, as per the previous lesson, but we also need oxygen with those nutrients in order to make energy for our body. In order for our body to survive and function, we need oxygen to go through this chemical reaction to make energy for our body. So, how do we breathe? We talked about this in our muscle lesson. The diaphragm is the muscle that moves when we breathe. It's not our lungs. Our lungs, well, they move in the sense that they inflate, but we don't actively, when we breathe in, we don't actively make our lungs bigger. What's happening is the diaphragm moves down when we inhale, when we breathe in, and moves up and moves up and forces the air out as we exhale or breathe out. Sorry, I have to cough. Like that, basically. I breathed in, the diaphragm went down, and then when I exhaled, as the cough did, the muscle goes up and causing the air to be pushed out of our lungs. Right? Now, I know I said muscles don't push. They don't. I shouldn't have said push. What's happening is when that diaphragm drops down, again, there's empty space, so that pressure drops. When you have that low pressure, the outside has that high pressure, so air will go into our lungs. Well, when we breathe out, the diaphragm moves up. Well, now there's a smaller space with a lot of air. So all that air is now under high pressure. And so under high pressure, and the outside is low pressure, the high pressure is going to follow the low pressure and go out our mouths, and we breathe that out. So that's how breathing works, right? The diaphragm goes down, the low pressure causes the high pressure air outside to go in, and when we breathe out, the diaphragm moves up, increasing the pressure in our lungs, causing the high pressure in our lungs to force the air out into the low pressure environment. Right? So when we inhale, air enters our nose. We're talking about our nose right now, right? And is filtered through hairs inside our nose. So that's why we have hairs in our nose. And that's because the job of those hairs, the reason why we have those nose hairs, is to catch stuff, right? So that this stuff doesn't get in our lungs. You don't want to breathe in dust. So your hairs act like a filter that catch stuff in the air so that only the oxygen and the other air molecules move down your nasal passage. And any dust or big stuff gets caught in your nose, right? Bacteria will sometimes get caught there too. And so when particles get caught in our nose, not just because of the hairs but touch the walls of our nose, when particles get caught in our nose, that creates the sensation of smell. So when you smell a flower, parts of that flower go up in your nose, little tiny particles, and they touch certain parts of your nose. And those certain parts send a message to your brain, and that makes smell. When you smell good food, small parts of that food enter your nose, and your nose your nose picks up on those small little parts that hit the sides of your nose, and it sends a message to your brain, sending you a message saying that that food smells good. And so that's basically how smell works. So, what about our mouths, right? Everyone's had a stuffed nose before, and everyone's sort of had to breathe through their mouths because their nose is so stuffed up. Well, we can breathe through our mouth. That's awesome. But the air, sorry, I have to cough again. The air is not filtered or warmed when it enters our body. So our nose also warms the air when it enters our body. So when air enters our nose, it's warmed and filtered by the hairs and goes into our lungs. When we breathe through our mouth, well, we don't have those hairs in our mouth. So the hairs in our mouth don't we don't have hairs in our mouth so that we can't filter the air. In addition, the mouth is quite large and it doesn't transmit the heat very well, and so the air isn't warmed either. Why is this bad? Well, when you breathe in through your mouth, it's not being filtered. All the dust and crud that you're breathing in through the air goes straight into your lungs. And that's bad. Because again, when we talk about our lungs, you'll see that they're kind of sensitive. And if something gets in our lungs, it can block our ability to get oxygen. So, how do we breathe? So, after passing through the air, or sometimes the mouth, air will enter through the trachea. The trachea in our throat and into our lungs. So, we have the trachea, it goes down here, right? And it branches out into something called a bronchi, right? It branches out in something called bronchi, right? And so when the trachea moves down our neck or down our throat, it branches out in our chest into something called bronchi. And those are just basically two tiny tracheas that split out into our lungs. The lungs, this is where the magic happens. The air moves down the trachea and into our lungs. The trachea then branches into bronchi and then divide even smaller. So like an upside down tree, this would be the trunk, right? The trachea will be the trunk, and it branches out, and it branches out even further, right? The big branches from the trachea are called bronchi, and these smaller branches, these tiny little branches, are called bronchioles. So you have trachea, bronchi, and bronchioles. And they allow the air to be spread out, right? It's branching and branching and branching so that the air spreads out in all these different directions and covers our lungs in all different areas, right? So it spreads out nice and easily, right? Each bronchiole ends with an alveoli, and it looks like this pack of grapes right here. It looks like this pack of grapes right here. So again, we breathe in through our nose. Our nose filters the air, warms the air, goes down our throat via the trachea. The trachea branches like a tree to be bronchi, and bronchi branch even more to make these smaller bronchioles. And at the end of those bronchioles, you have alveoli. Alveoli act like tiny balloons. So at the end of the bronchiole, you got these little balloons called bronchioli, and these are filled with air that you breathe in. Small blood vessels called capillaries, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Small blood vessels called capillaries take in oxygen. So you have these tiny blood vessels, these red marks right here on these balloons called alveoli, take in oxygen. So oxygen will then go into your bloodstream. They will enter your circulatory system. And what also happens is carbon dioxide enters those balloons. And so when all the oxygen's been pulled out and all the CO2's been put in, our body then says, time to breathe out. And then our balloons force that air, well, the CO2, out of our bronchioles, up through our bronchi, up through our trachea, and out through our mouth or nose, while the oxygen enters our bloodstream. So gas exchange. So when air enters the alveoli, the blood in the vessels around the alveoli, so we have this alveoli right here, we have this balloon right here. And so what's happening is oxygen comes in, it's like a trade, oxygen comes in, and CO2 comes out, right? It's trading oxygen for CO2. It's trading oxygen and CO2. The oxygen is then in our blood, and our blood travels throughout our body. And so that blood is then, that oxygen is sent throughout our body, while the CO2 goes into our lungs. And so that's how breathing works. We breathe in, the air goes in through our nose or mouth, down through our trachea, through the bronchi, branching bronchioles, into the alveoli. The alveoli, like balloons, fill up with that air. The oxygen goes into the bloodstream because there's vessels around the alveoli, as you can see right here. And so the oxygen enters the bloodstream, while CO2, or carbon dioxide, leaves the bloodstream and enters our lungs. And then when we breathe out, all that carbon dioxide, all that CO2 leaves our body. So that's basically how we breathe. Now we're going to talk about the circulatory system, because we just said, oh, well, nutrients from the digestive system enters our bloodstream because, if you remember, the small intestines absorb nutrients and from our food, and those nutrients enter our blood. In addition, oxygen goes into our lungs and enters our bloodstream. Well, the purpose of the circulatory system is to move stuff around. And that's why the nutrients in our digestive system, the oxygen in our respiratory system, they both enter our bloodstream or circulatory system, because their job is to move the oxygen and move the nutrients to parts of the body, to where the body needs it. Your body constantly needs oxygen. Your body constantly needs nutrients. So your heart, made of muscle, cardiac muscle, pumps blood throughout the body. And so that blood delivers oxygen and delivers nutrients so that our body can survive. Your toe needs oxygen and nutrients just as much as your brain needs oxygen and nutrients. And so your blood pumps all around through the body, giving the parts of the body oxygen and nutrients. So the respiratory system brings oxygen into the body and expels CO2. But the whole body needs oxygen and makes CO2, right? As our body is doing that chemical reaction, it's using oxygen and making CO2. The purpose of the digestive system is to get nutrients and the energy we eat from the food, to get energy from the food we eat. But that energy needs to make it to the rest of the body, right? It can't just sit in our small intestine. Our oxygen can't just sit in our lungs. It needs to move to the brain, the tips of our fingers, all the way down to our toes. The circulatory system takes the nutrients. The circulatory system takes the oxygen, as well as the CO2 from parts of the body, and moves them around to where they need. And this is done, one of the big things that let us do this is our red blood cells. Our red blood cells are used to transport, mainly oxygen throughout the body. Now, our blood does transport waste and energy, but the red blood cells mainly transport oxygen. The red blood cells mainly transport oxygen. Now, there's other parts of our blood, right? There's the liquid parts of our blood called the plasma, which is everything else. And you have the red blood cells. The red blood cells take the oxygen, the nutrients, and waste enter our bloodstream as well. And our blood transports that oxygen, transports that waste, transports that energy to where it's needed most. I should probably say nutrients instead of energy, but for grade 8, we'll just say energy. And so our blood cells, our red blood cells, take the oxygen and deliver it to where it's needed, our brain, our heart, our toes, our fingers, as well as moving nutrients to where it's needed, our brain, our toes, our heart, and fingers. But again, our body makes waste. CO2, carbon dioxide. Our body makes waste all the time. When we make carbon dioxide in our brains, our hearts, our toes, and fingers. And so when our blood makes that delivery of oxygen and nutrients, it also picks up the waste. It picks up the CO2. And that CO2 has to go somewhere, so it goes in our lungs. And so it goes to our lungs, our blood goes to our lungs, and the CO2 goes into our lungs, and again, the blood picks up the oxygen. So, what moves the blood? The heart. The heart moves the blood. It's a very strong muscle, and its job is to pump blood throughout the body. Its job is to pump blood throughout the body. So, blood enters through here, gets pumped, and gets pumped and eventually exits through there, right? And when it exits, it goes through the rest of the body. Right? Actually, I should probably fix that because that's actually incorrect. The blood enters through here, gets pumped through there, comes back, and then comes out there. Anyways, so our heart pumps blood to the lungs. The blood delivers the carbon dioxide to the lungs and also picks up the oxygen. And it comes back to the heart. When it comes back to the heart, it gets pumped again. And that pump sends that blood with that fresh oxygen straight through where it needs, our brain, our toes, our fingers. And so the left side of the heart pumps blood to the body. So the left side of the heart pumps blood to the body, so this side. And the right side of the heart pumps blood to the lungs. Now, in that moment, you might be thinking, but wait, isn't this the left side? Yes, that's your left. You're thinking about this, when you're saying the left side of the heart pumps blood to the body, you're thinking about if that was your heart, it would be facing you, and this would be that person's left, and this would be that person's right? So if you're looking at this video, turn around. Oh no, your left side's on the other side from when you were facing the video, right? That's what it means. If this was someone's heart, this would be their left side, and this would be their right side. And so this will be a counterintuitive thing to know, but just know that it's the opposite when you're looking at it. When you're looking at a picture of the heart, that this is the left side and this is the right side. And the left side pumps blood to the body, and the right side pumps blood to the lungs, almost to the heart. So there are 3 types of vessels in our body. 3 big types. There are the veins. These guys, they transport blood to the heart, right? When the blood has made its delivery, when it's given its oxygen and it's picked up its CO2, it goes into the veins and gets sent back to the heart and into the lungs and does that whole cycle. The arteries are where the blood is transported away from the heart, moved away from the heart. I like to think of away arteries, right? Blood moves away from the heart. This blood has the oxygen. It's picked up the oxygen from the lungs and is now being pumped to the rest of the body so that our fingers, our toes, and our brain, for example, can get that oxygen. Capillaries are the super small vessels. They're super small because they allow nutrients and oxygen to go through. So we talked about our alveoli when we talked about the respiratory system. Well, our alveoli are surrounded by capillaries. And these super thin, tiny vessels, well, they allow oxygen to go through, right? They allow oxygen to go through. In addition, our villi and microvilli are also surrounded by capillaries. And those capillaries also let nutrients in to our bloodstream. So capillaries are very, very thin vessels that allow our body to take in or release different substances. So this will talk about the journey of blood throughout your body, as well as review everything we've talked about. Hopefully this was helpful and it didn't go too fast. There was a lot of information in this lesson, and I tried to review it as best I can. If this is still confusing or if you feel like this is a lot, just watch parts of this video in repeat and focus on parts that you don't seem to understand. Thank you, and I'll see you next lesson.